My name's Constance. I'm a compulsive eater. And I just, I was trying to find something in the big book to read, and I was going to go to that passage where it says we either go to the bitter end, blocking out the past, or we decide to live on a spiritual basis. And for an alcoholic, that's not always an easy choice. Or I think for a compulsive eater, I know it's not an easy choice. And we have to think about it. That always amazes me because I don't think normal people have to think about things like that. They would say, of course, I want to live on a spiritual basis. I don't want to be in the dark, living out to the bitter end in the dark, which is how it was when I was eating food. It was always that way. But what I opened up to, and I'll just say this really quickly, it says, this is on page 24. It says, the alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, it won't burn me it won't burn me this time, so here's how. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How often have some of us began to drink in this nonchalant way, and after the third or fourth pounded on the bar and said to ourselves, for God's sake, how did I ever get started again? Only to have that thought supplanted in, well, I'll stop with the sixth drink, or what's the use anyhow. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may die or go permanently insane. And that describes my eating. That's how I would eat. So, but let me just start out. I was so in the very beginning, I don't know that I was a compulsive eater. I don't have any way of knowing that because I was a very thin child. When I was in the second grade, I had an appendicitis and I almost died. And then when I was in the fourth grade, I had a tonsillitis. My tonsils were taken out. And at that time I started to eat more food. And before that I would barely eat, and I would often get sick. And my mother said they were so thrilled that I started to eat, if you can imagine that. However, once I started to eat, all things were over. And what I do remember is I remember going to my aunt's house, and she had these little sweet things. And I remember my mother saying, stop eating those. And I couldn't stop. And my aunt would say, oh, that's okay. But, I must have eaten over half of them, and I couldn't stop. And it was embarrassing. It was humiliating. Demoralization was what it was. And I just remember not being able to stop. I remember stealing food from when I was babysitting. I would move the food. I would always know what was in the kitchen because I would take an inventory to make sure I knew what was in that house to eat. And I would kind of try to move it around so people wouldn't notice. And it was babysitting for my aunt. And she asked me one day, aren't you eating my food, or da, 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 da. And I said, oh no, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I just outwardly lied to her. So those are some of the examples of how I compulsively ate. I also always thought about food. And I don't remember when I was really young, really thinking about food. I will tell you one other experience. Well, number one, I grew up in the middle of nowhere on a farm. My father grew potatoes, and I went to a country school that had 3 grades in one room and 3 grades in the other. And we were very, very rural. So that's an example of where I grew up and how it was. And one of the examples that I can tell you is we went to our friend's house. We had horses. It was real horsey. And so we went to our friend's house, and they had little girls my age, and I was probably about 10. And I remember just being so hungry, I couldn't wait until we ate. But we were in even a more rural area than I had ever been. And these little girls, we were playing with the horses and playing something. And I don't know how they could play all day without thinking of eating, but it's like eating was not on their mind. They were thinking about playing. I always had in the back of my mind, what are we eating, particularly the sweet stuff. So later on, so that's how I thought, and my weight was always, I always at some point or another had to worry about my weight. After the fourth grade, my body image of myself was, I thought that I was extremely fat, overweight. And my mother would sew these absolutely beautiful clothes, and she would make them in the fall when I was home at the summer, and it was hot, and we worked really hard on the farm. So I would be probably 5 to 6 pounds thinner. She would make them, and then I couldn't wear them during the school year because I would gain weight, and I thought there was really something wrong with me. But I was always fighting the weight, the body image, the whatever, self-esteem. Well, I went to college, and it was the first time I got to eat freely. Oh my God. Everybody else, most people to save money got, a lesser than 3 meal food plan. Not me. I got the 3 meals, and I ate all 3 meals. And then I even got a job for a while working in the cafeteria. So it's just like, and I started to gain weight. I remember going across the road or the street to the store, and for the first time, I could buy what I wanted without any supervision. And you know what I bought? I didn't buy clothes. I bought food. And I just really was involved in this thing of, I got to lose weight. Then I would eat. I got to lose weight. I would eat. And I ended up in college going to a psychologist. And it was the first time that I ever realized that eating wasn't a sin, and that we had to eat every day to live. So that's just sort of how it was. And then the other thing, of course, I would throw food away in the trash can, dig it out of the trash can. I would sneak it at work. Once I got a job, I would sneak it at work so other people wouldn't know how much was eating, because there was someone who brought food to work every day. I don't know, she had some sort of a job where she got food, and she brought it, and she never seemed to eat it, but I would. So, and then I wouldn't want people to know how much. So that's sort of the way it was. Just to fast forward, I say today, I am an alcoholic. But I will walk past the bar to go to the bakery every time. The bakery always wins. However, if you have freebase cocaine, I will freebase the cocaine, and then later I will eat all the food. In my early 20s or 30s, I thought that I had found this solution with the freebasing cocaine, that I could eat that, because the minute you do that, you don't want to eat. So I would go 3 to 4 days without eating. And then of course, I would lose weight, and then I would eat everything in sight, include sleeping. And so I thought I had found a solution to the weight problem. Well, that didn't last a whole long time. So once I got sober, I started to gain a lot of weight, and someone told me about OA. So I went to OA, and I thought the people there were kind of silly, that they whined a lot. They should maybe just go try. And this was my sick thinking, that maybe I should just go and try a few little drugs, that would calm them down a little. I mean, that was my first early thoughts. And I couldn't see that I had the same disease, and that my thinking was really, really sick. So at some point or other, I met another alcoholic who turned me on to how, and I started going to how. And I remember planning my relapse with how. And I want to talk a little bit about relapse in here, but not with how. I want to talk about Gray Sheet, because as far as I'm concerned, for myself, Gray Sheet I have found the solution. So anyway, I relapsed in how, and I thought once I remember going to the store, buying the food. I had other abstinent how abstinent food at home waiting for me. And I thought, well, I'll just go make this little run, eat this food, and then I'll go back to being abstinent. And it didn't work. It took me 2 or 3 years. And I didn't go back to Hal, but this same friend said, you know, I'm doing Gray Sheet. And so she took me to my first Gray Sheet meeting in El Cerrito, California. And a very dear friend of mine, she had a garage sale after the meeting. And I went over to her garage sale and she 12-stepped me and explained to me about the allergy that we have to flour and sugar. And that if I took those and according, and also the other starchy stuff that we don't eat, that once I took those into my body developed a craving. And then once I started eating, I couldn't stop. And that my mind, being the obsessive, crazy mind that I have, would tell me every time I can do this differently and it will work out differently. And, you know, not one time has it ever. And I stand here before you, and I hope that I'm standing here humbly because I so admire anybody who has in this room that has long-term abstinence. I just admire you so much. I almost want to cry. So anyway, so I started Gray Sheet and it was wonderful. I had one small relapse in behind a relationship. I got into this relationship with this really crazy compulsive eater man, and he was actually living in my house, and it was pretty insane. Um, and in that relapse, I'll tell you that my son's story. I had a son. I still have a son, but my son at that time was entering into his senior year of high school. So I'm in relapse, and I tell my son, I said, we got to go buy your school clothes. So we're driving to San Leandro. I'm driving along in my car, right? Buzzing along, thinking about we're going to go get those clothes. And I already know what we're going to have for lunch. I got lunch figured out, okay? And so I tell my son, and he's 17 years old, and he's like, oh. And I say, and then we're going to go have lunch. And we're going to go here and we're going to do this. And he goes, Mom, when you get home, you might want to pick that scale up again and start to weigh and measure that food. Now, this child didn't care if I was fat or thin, but he saw the insanity that happened once I started eating the food. So this is what happened. Another friend of mine in Gray Sheet that has many years of abstinence called me and she goes, Constance, I just want to know how it is out there in the food world. Well, I was sitting in my living room and there were papers. I have a war with paper, by the way, and paper wins. I just concede it wins, okay? But I had paper all over my living room. Some of it wrappers, some of it paper. And, you know, life was not too good right then. I got the guy living upstairs in my house. He weighs 500 pounds or something like that. And my son's pissed off as hell at me. I got my ex-husband living downstairs in the other part of the unit who's using drugs. And I'm sober, but I'm not. I'm not abstinent. And I'm like, and I call this untreated alcoholism today. And I'm in a bind. Anyway, my friend says to me, just called to see how it was out there in that world. And I go, And she goes, well, do you want to get abstinent? I said, yeah, I think I'd like to. She goes, well, do you want to commit your food to me now? And I said, I don't know what I got. And she goes, well, do you want to go to your refrigerator and look in your cupboard and see what you've got that's abstinent? And then call me back. And I did. I called her back and she took my food. Now, something happened in there where I'm sure that I made her crazy because the rest of my life was crazy and I literally could not get the food together for 3 meals. So she fired me, bless her heart. She rehired me later, but she fired me. So someone else took my food and bless her heart, she told me it must have been for 2 weeks. She said, call me right before you get ready to eat and leave the food on my voicemail. And I did. And eventually sanity returned. 500 guy pound left. My son told me before he was going to college too, by the way. So, well, I guess that was the following year actually. And he said to me, when I come back, Mom, I won't at Christmas. I'm not staying here if that guy's still here. You got to get
Constance,
rid of
that's
5 minutes.
15. Okay, yep.
Okay, so anyway, to fast forward, so I did. To make a long story short, I want to hurry this through. So, and then my second relapse that I had was after about 7 years of abstinence. I started getting I don't think we get sloppy with the food, but I started just leaving the food on a voicemail of a new sponsor. And I started getting further and further away from the program. But I knew that I was a compulsive eater. So I would pray every day that I didn't have to come back to Gray Sheet. But what happened was my obsessiveness with the food almost killed me. I would think about the food. If I eat this, what'll happen? If I eat that, what'll happen? Da 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 da. I just went on. And finally, I picked up some food. And long story short, I called somebody. I binged on the food. I called somebody. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And today, I've got to say, I have 2 years. So I feel like I've earned that 2 years. But what I want to really say to thank you to everyone here is I've been blessed with in this time being able to take the steps in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think I do an 11th step every day because I have to be spiritually fit. But, and I've worked with these 2 sponsees that are don't have food problems, but they, and one of them recently, we were reviewing the book, and I won't get into their situation, but I realized there's a decision in here. When I first got sober, I made a decision that somehow or another that the life that I was leading with the freebasing of the cocaine wasn't working anymore. And I wasn't going to go back to that life. There was that 3rd step decision where we make that decision somewhere in there. And then when Big Man was in my house, somehow or another, I made that decision that I would get abstinent and that I would take these steps and I would live by these principles that have been set down for me when we talk about our solution. So what I would love to hear from people as a topic or anything, and I don't know that you do a topic, but and I should start making outreach calls to find this out, was when did one make that decision that I couldn't control this food anymore, that I couldn't, like my life was unmanageable, that I was willing to do something else to make my life better. Today, my life is really good. It's just like God has blessed me with an abundance of goodness in spite of the pandemic. I just have to be so careful of myself and of my own impulsive, obsessive mind. So thank you for letting me share. And thank you for being here and staying here when I left. And when I came back, I was welcome back. So thank you so much. That's it.